Now, I will also be opening the floor to a lot of questions at the very end. So if you've got anything you want to ask or hold on to until I open up the floor for discussion, please feel free to do so. But for everyone who's entered, feel free to just chuck your questions into the chat box at this stage. So, welcome everyone. We are covering mind body approaches for arthritis, and I'm really interested to hear from you guys in terms of your understanding about what stress does to your arthritis. If anyone's tried mindfulness and have has that strategy as part of your ongoing care for your arthritis. It's really interesting when we delve into the science of it. Before we get into it, I will start with a acknowledgement of traditional owners. So we acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land in which we gather today. We pay our respects to their elders, past and present. And just a general disclaimer for these webinars is that we do make sure we go through the effort to back everything up with the evidence. We make sure everything is accurate and reliable. They're not here to substitute any individual treatment advice. So, if questions do relate back to your own individual treatment plans, medications, even, I'll always advise you to go speak to your primary healthcare provider, your GP, rheumatologist, whoever is your doctor. But I'll do my best to try help you out where I can. So, in today's session, it's a really interesting one. We do talk a lot about the link between the chronic pain, the body, and the mind. And hopefully, by the end of this session, you'll understand the intersection between them and just how important and how powerful those strategies like mindfulness, cognitive behavioral therapy, even breathing techniques, how powerful they can be. So I do like to start these sessions off with a little bit of science and background. I do jump into some of the evidence to back them, and then we'll talk about some more practical things we can be doing on our day to day to make sure we're implementing them where we can. So, we do know that everyone experiences pain differently, but also everyone experience deals with pain differently. So some people they do come back and they ask us, well, why can this person cope better with pain than this person? And this is really just down to the fact that mechanisms for pain vary a lot from person to person. So the link between the body, mind and chronic pain in the context of arthritis is really strong. It's well documented. We have data on that. So, arthritis, it's not just a physical condition. I like to think of it as a biopsychosocial experience. That just ultimately means it's more than just biology. There's psychological factors, there's social factors. All of these things play a role in how pain is felt, how it's experienced, managed. And so there are several factors that contribute to this diversity. Factors that could relate back to someone's nervous system, how sensitive you are to pain. It could relate back to the painful stimuli, the disease itself, as well as the ability to actually modulate that pain. So, some people do have more sensitive nervous systems. Uh, they will tend to have higher pain intensity. And in terms of pain patterns, they're more likely to have a mix of chronic and intermittent pain as opposed to bouts of intermittent moderate pain cycles. So we see people who have more intense pain but for longer durations as well. So when the nervous systems are what we call dysregulated, or you could think of it as being sensitized, we often also see a detriment to the well-being somewhere. So this is why some people who have more challenges with mood, emotional regulation, it could be sleeping patterns, maybe past pain experiences, it could be high stress levels, anxiety. All these things might look different from person to person. It could be other coexisting conditions, but these people who have high levels of these can have devastating impacts of pain on your quality of life. So it's not just neurobiology here, but there is a psychological and social component here. And
Okay.
that's what I want to talk about a little bit further.
Go ahead then.
Oh, getting some feedback come through. I'll just keep letting some people in. Please don't mind me as I let people into this session. Okay, so moving forward and taking a look at our statistics and what we know that 1 in 5 adults living with arthritis also experience depression and anxiety. So there have been several studies that have been done over the years. We know approximately 22 percent of people with arthritis experience depression. That's actually compared to 16.3% in the general population, meaning that people with arthritis are over 35% more likely to experience that depression. If we're talking about anxiety, we know that 21% percent of people with arthritis live with it, compared to about 12.2% of the general population. I mean, we don't really know how concrete these figures are, but it has been pulled from the evidence that's been collected over the years. But if we're talking about anxiety, that's nearly double the risk we're at if you have arthritis. So when you compare this again to other chronic diseases, like maybe it's heart disease or diabetes, these statistics are relatively higher, suggesting that arthritis it does carry a very heavy psychological burden. And I'm sure some of us who live with chronic pain can acknowledge that and understand that. But it is a complex two-way relationship between arthritis and mental health. So, on one hand, you have arthritis that can take a toll on mental well-being, the ongoing pain, reduced mobility, um, even that sense of isolation. It could be worries about the future. These are all valid things to worry about, but they can contribute to low mood, anxiety, affect your quality of life. But then you have, on the other hand, feeling anxious, stressed, depressed can actually
Oh,
make the
Mayan.
arthritis symptoms worse. Oh, just quickly mute some people. Um, so we have a lot of research and stats here to suggest that if we're talking about inflammatory arthritis and depression, we know there's a significant proportion of people who aren't actually getting adequate mental health support, and they're going without the help they need. So, despite how common mental health issues are when people live with arthritis, we also know that there isn't proper support being accessed nor available. So, what I do want to talk about is the science behind it, so we can understand it just a little bit further. So, I'm sure all of us can agree that arthritis is a very painful disease, but it's also very unpredictable in nature. So, when we speak to a lot of people, it's the unpredictability sometimes that can actually wear people down. One day you're managing okay, the next day you could be struggling to walk or get out of bed or get off the couch. So, it does affect more than just the joints at this stage. It can change how you function, it could change how you see yourself, how you live your daily life. So, when we talk about pain in arthritis, I want to go back to what's really happening and what's going on. When your joints are, they could be damaged, they could be inflamed. Pain doesn't just come from the site. It doesn't just come from an affected joint. Pain is very much processed in the brain. So it's the brain that ultimately decides how much danger you're in. We always talk about pain as being an alarm signal. So how much the brain will actually determine how much pain you should feel. And it's that interpretation that goes further than just the joints. The brain also takes into account things like, have you been through this before? How bad was it? Are you anxious? Are you stressed, depressed? Are you exhausted? Have you been sleeping poorly? Are you afraid to move in case it makes things worse? Do you feel like you have any control? All these things can actually influence that dial of pain. It could ramp pain up or it could turn the volume down on pain. So I like to think of it almost like a volume kind of dial. But this is why arthritis pain, I go back to that original question of why people cope differently from one another is because pretty much it can check all these things are so different from person to person. So, something that often comes up when we're talking about mind body is the HPA axis. If you've ever heard about it, if anyone's enrolled into our Relax and Restore program, you might have heard this before. But for anyone who's new here, the HPA axis stands for the hypothalamic pituitary adrenal axis. This is a major part of the body's stress response system, and it's basically you can think of a communication pathway between the brain, adrenal glands, which control the release of stress hormones. So, if anyone's heard of cortisol before, it's a hormone that's released when we're stressed. So, stress is a very natural part of existence, and everyone experiences it from time to time. It'd be unrealistic to say, oh, we um, have never experienced stress or we can reduce stress entirely. But bad stress, is usually triggered by unsettling circumstances. It could be life pressures, being overloaded with responsibilities. Having a disease like arthritis in itself can be stressful. And the reason I bring this up is because although cortisol is a stress hormone, it's actually designed to help the body respond to stress. It's when we're constantly releasing this hormone, it's when this HPA axis is constantly activated and we're constantly releasing cortisol. And this is very common when you live with chronic pain or anxiety. Co- ex- I guess constantly activating the cortisol in the body can lead to things like increased inflammation. It's known to disrupt sleeping patterns, lowering pain tolerance, and it can contribute to that fatigue, depression. It can even dysregulate the immune system. So, all these things, they do feed into one another. Um, so, if we take a further look at some research, in 2019, there was a really large study that looked at data from over 1,400 people. Now, all living with knee osteoarthritis, they weren't just asked about physical symptoms, they also shared information about things like anxiety, depression, how much they tended to catastrophize. Um, so, really exaggerate how they're dealing with things, whether they experience nerve like pain, fatigue, sleep issues, it could be widespread pain, even things like brain fog or difficulty concentrating. What the researchers found was really interesting and it was really important because people who reported high levels of all these traits, like having more anxiety, having more stress, more negative thoughts about the pain or what they can do and what their future look like. Also reported to have more severe and persistent pain symptoms. So what this kind of tells us is that pain isn't just about the joint. It's actually shaped by what's happening in the whole person. It's about the moods, the energy, the sleep, stress levels. Researchers actually concluded that to manage pain effectively, we do need to go beyond just medications or just surgery. We need to look at supporting these other areas as well. Things like mental well-being, pain coping strategies. There are so many underlying factors that can affect how someone experiences pain, but can also help predict who's going to experience more severe, more frequent bouts of pain. So, osteoarthritis isn't the only disease in focus here. There's actually research behind people who live with an inflammatory type of arthritis, like rheumatoid. So there was a 2021 study that looked at over 500 people living with RA. What they found was that many of them were also living with anxiety and depression. So we actually don't know if the disease causes the anxiety or depression, or the depression and anxiety links back to the worsening of the disease. What we know is that there's a link there. So, what they found in this study was that about 18% of people had anxiety, nearly 28% had depression, some had both. But here's where it gets really interesting is that the people who were experiencing anxiety and or depression weren't necessarily the ones with high levels of disease activity, so high levels of inflammatory markers. Instead, they were the ones more likely to report high levels of pain, more physical disability, poorer self rated health, lower quality of life, difficulty managing daily tasks. There was even something on treatment adherence as well. And in some cases, they were less likely to actually comply with their treatment plan. So, what this tells us is that psychological well-being can really play a big role in that ongoing management. And there are emotional and mental health challenges that can amplify pain. It can make day to day life harder. But it highlights that there is a role for counseling, stress management, those mind body approaches we often talk about. So what I hope we understand now is that, mental health, it's not separate from physical health. It is deeply connected. That's one of the key takeaways I want us to really understand. And using mind body techniques. So this could be all encompassing of mindfulness, gentle movement, relaxation and guided imagery. It could be cognitive strategies. All of these are not only intended to help you feel more in control, improve mood, support better overall functioning, but it's really coming through in the pain science. So while medication, it absolutely has its place. It can be helpful if it's necessary. But there are so many other strategies that are well supported by the evidence to help with pain management, and that evidence is building. So, if we take a look at the evidence behind psychological and mindfulness based approaches, psychological interventions include things like CBT, mindfulness, relaxation techniques, education. These have shown moderate effectiveness in helping people not just osteoarthritis, but rheumatoid arthritis. It helps with managing pain, distress, day to day functioning. There was a large meta analysis that was done um, of about 57 high quality studies. So they found these approaches had a medium effect size overall, and some showing even larger benefits in the best cases. There's no evidence of harm with these interventions as well. So these interventions are considered safe, well tolerated. But if you're going to pick one that really stands out the most out of all the strategies, CBT is really at the top here. It stands out as the most effective. Um, CBT is also backed by the most evidence at this stage. It's the most widely evaluated psychological therapy. So, this program helps people develop more realistic, balanced attitudes, beliefs about the disease. It focuses more on replacing unhelpful thoughts and behaviors with more positive ones. So, we do have data that tells us it has been beneficial for reducing pain, improving mental well-being, and the benefits have shown to last to up to a year. So, there could be some longer term benefits here. So it is recommended as a first line therapy for chronic pain. Mindfulness based interventions, although they're showing promise, the evidence is a bit more mixed here. So there are some good studies that exist, but some are more smaller cohorts involved, maybe less consistent effects. And so, in terms of study quality, most of the evidence, it's not as gold standard as what a RCT would be, but it's still promising. It's showing that it can be beneficial for both anxiety and inflammation. And I hope by now we do understand there is a link between the two. So, we're also seeing a lot of growth in digital CBT programs. Has I'm interested to know if anyone uses one, if you have one that's downloaded, ready to go, you're not quite sure about it yet. You can pop if you have a really good quality one that you use all the time. I'd love you to put it in the chat. But we're seeing a lot of growth in app-based tools, online tools, but they're also backed by evidence. They're showing clinically meaningful improvements in all the domains: mood, anxiety, fatigue, and just overall functioning. So we don't really know how they stand up in the arthritis space. That's just because we don't have the evidence yet. But we know that it's been beneficial for all those other things that I've suggested have an impact on pain. Okay, just enabling some captions. So, mindfulness based stress reduction and mindfulness based cognitive therapy, if you've ever heard of them, they're both structured, evidence based mindfulness programs, and they share very similar foundations. They do differ in focus and application, and I'll go through, um, take a glance at both of those very shortly. But your MBSR is an 8-week course that teaches a variety of mindfulness practices. So, it's designed to help stress, anxiety, support overall well-being, but the emphasis is more on being rather than doing. So, how that translates essentially is that instead of aiming to fix pain or chase specific outcomes, it's a practice that actually invites you to simply be present. So, letting go of that urgency or that need and desire to constantly plan or problem solve or dwell on things like your pain or um you know dwell on the future that you're uncertain about. It's about accepting the moment as it is with openness, awareness, rather than trying to change it. So it's all about changing a mindset. NBCT builds on that. Um, so it incorporates principles of cognitive behavioral therapy, which is a little bit more clinically focused, and it's more used in the context of managing depression, anxiety, and unhelpful thinking patterns. But the emphasis here is on acceptance and changing your relationship to thoughts and feelings. And so that could actually extend to changing your relationship with pain. So instead of avoiding or reacting fully to difficult emotions or beliefs, this program is really just designed to help you learn how to observe them mindfully and respond with a skill of self compassion. So it can be tricky to do, but this is what the programs are designed to do. They're meant to be particularly useful for people who live with arthritis and chronic pain, but also have the layers of anxiety and depression as well. So, if we take a closer look at these programs, they're both based on mindfulness principles and those mind body approaches. They're designed to enhance that emotional resilience. They're intended as complementary supports along that mainstream medical care. They're both structured group programs. They both have a strong research base. Sorry, just make sure everyone's muted. Um, they both can help people with not just arthritis, but those other comorbid conditions like maybe heart disease, diabetes, and both promote personal insight and self regulation. Main differences here: MBSI is going to be more ideal for an individual who needs to reduce stress, who wants to improve overall well being and cope with chronic pain or illness through mindfulness. But mindfulness based cognitive therapy might be more suitable if you're dealing with depression, anxiety, persistent negative thinking, and thought patterns. And it adds the cognitive strategies to the mindfulness foundation. So it is a bit more clinically focused. So the beautiful thing about the brain is that it's not fixed. If anyone's heard of neuroplasticity, it just means that the brain has an ability to change. So that's why with regular and consistent practice, mind body interventions like mindfulness, relaxation, cognitive strategies, over time, they can have an incredible impact because they've been able to retrain the brain's response to pain. Um, so we do have evidence that suggests they can help with lowering pain signals, lowering pain sensitivity, and support an overall calmer, more resilient nervous system. So, in essence, we're not just talking about the way you're managing pain, we're actually talking about reshaping the way your brain actually experiences pain. So, when we go back and think what we said about how pain is processed, it's all essentially in the brain. So it's a way of kind of getting in there and helping um, reshape it. So when we talk about mindfulness and relaxation, some of us will think of it as maybe sitting on the ground, sitting in nature, sitting in silence, meditating, grounding yourselves. But it can also just be about recognizing what exactly is driving that stress response and reframing the logic around it. So, this is why I love this flowchart that I've got here on this page. It's an example of what mindfulness can look like in practice or when you're having a flare up. So, it shows how easily we can actually become caught in that automatic stress reaction, but shows you how we can also go about getting a handle on it. So, learning to recognize and managing stress response is key to improving well-being. Um, Ultimately, when we talk about mindfulness, it's about detecting stress as soon as it comes on. So, we do have a physiological response to stress. Often it's the breath, but we can also see it in body sensations, thought patterns. Once we catch it, it's always a good idea to just pause and ask, what's driving this? Where is my attention? What thoughts or emotions are fueling the reaction? So, this is an example of how you can apply mindfulness as soon as you start becoming stressed about your condition. Just by becoming aware of this, you can start to redirect your attention back to the present moment and just help break the stress loop. When you're not tuned in, it's the brain's fear center that reacts automatically to perceived stress. So it can trigger that stress hormone I mentioned. It can trigger hormones like adrenaline. So the body can become tense, the mind can become agitated. As we prepare for fight and flight, even if the threat is just a thought, we can still get those bodily sensations. One of the clearest signs of stress is the changes in breathing. Maybe you're someone who holds your breath, or maybe it becomes shallow and rapid. Often it's high in the chest. So the moment you become mindful of what your breath is doing, it's a sign you've been able to catch those early signals. So if you recognize this and you recognize you're having a stress response, it's a good way of de escalating that from feeding into that stress cycle. If you don't notice it, this is when stress can escalate and maybe eventuate into a panic attack. And I don't know how many of us have had panic attacks, but it can be hard to get a handle on it. Once we become aware of what we're caught in the stress or anxiety, we can begin to interrupt it. So you check in with your attention. What am I focused on right now? Chances are that your mind could be wandering back into the present or stuck in self-judgment. It's about gently redirecting attention. You can expect your mind to wander. That's a very normal, natural part of being stressed. But the key is to really keep noticing when it wanders and bring it back. So, this process is actually the core of meditation. It goes way more than, grounding yourself, sitting on the ground and closing your eyes. It's about really, practicing how to be present, noticing when your mind strays and bringing it back without judgment. So, as soon as stress arises, mindfulness is a way of teaching you how to notice it, recognize what's fueling it, and bringing it back skillfully. So, this is pretty much why I highlight it's such a foundational tool to have in your toolbox. When you are feeling overwhelmed, anxious, or tense, it's really easy to feel stuck. And even those small actions can just help you feel 1% better. You don't actually need to be use any special equipment or sit in a special quiet room. It's just a few simple mindfulness techniques that can help retrain the brain, retrain the nervous system, bring you back into the present moment when you are getting stressed. And so they're very powerful tools that can be used anytime and anywhere. So I'm not going to go through all of these mindfulness interventions with everyone today. When you do get a copy of these presentation slides, I will encourage you to give some of them a try. But, like I said, breathing is one of the fastest ways to regulate your nervous system. This simple exercise is really to help signal to your brain that you're safe. And so I've got a few instructions you can follow in your own time and at your own pace, but it's a good practice. And just a tip when you are practicing breathing exercises, focus on the feeling of the air filling and leaving the lungs. So, this is where it really helps anchor your attention in the present. We have grounding techniques. If you've ever heard of the 5, 4, 3, 2, 1 method, when your thoughts feel like they're spilling everywhere, this is a sensory based technique. So, it's intended to bring you back to your body and your surroundings. So, 5 things you can see around you, 4 things you can touch, 3 things you can hear, 2 things you can smell, 1 thing you can taste. It's designed to actually help you engage all your senses. So, this is a very powerful one that can work if you feel your stress is escalating into a panic attack. Um, I guess gentle movement, Tai Chi, Qigong, even just slow movements. Our bodies hold so much tension without realizing it. So, even things like a body scan, it's another practice where it helps reconnect you with your physical self. And so, it's about noticing when that stress is showing up. Sometimes we're so caught up in stress that we don't realize how it affects our body, how it affects our joints, how it's contributing to that pain as well. So, everything you feel, those tight shoulders, the headaches, the shallow breathing, these are all things that play into that. So, these techniques are essentially designed to help you just better recognize these things. They can support better emotional regulation, reduce muscle tension, but then they can have longer term effects as well as like improving sleep, fatigue, um, hopefully inflammation over time. So, a big question that always comes up is, well, how much do we need per day to be reaping those benefits we've listed um, and gone on and on about? Some people will say you need about 20 minutes a day. Some say 15 in the morning, 15 at night. Some might say 5 minutes. So, this is where we do want to think about a person centered approach. There's so much research that has tried to explore what is that optimal dose of mindfulness? How much do we need? There's comparable benefits in the group that implements mindfulness at 20 to 30 minutes a day, and benefits that are comparable at practicing it 1 to 5 minutes a day. So, when it comes to practicing it in your own lives, there's really no one size fits all. The key is just to find that balance, find something that works for you. If 10 to 20 minutes works for you, um, that's such a good effort. I think the most important thing is to cultivate a practice that you can actually sustain, you can keep doing from day to day, you can be consistent with it. That's where it's going to help with your personal mindfulness goals. So, if you do want to get started and you feel like this is something that you're ready to explore and you're ready to put into practice, it could be a good idea to actually speak about your feelings with your healthcare provider, speak to a GP. Sometimes you can get access to mental health plans. Something that's worth exploring if you do struggle with pain, but you also struggle with anxiety and depression. Those things I mentioned before sound like they resonate with you. You can find a support group or speak with a mental health professional. Prioritizing self care. So this looks different again from everyone for everyone. There's no one size fits all. It self care is it's basically consciously engaging in activities that promote physical, emotional, and mental well-being. Spending time outdoors, moving regularly, whether it's going for a 5, 6 kilometer run or practicing yoga, or even just getting up and doing the vacuuming around the house, all these things can help. So, if you've heard of our Relax and Restore program, I'm actually interested to know, does anyone do it themselves? Has anyone been involved in this? You can just pop your answer in the chat group. But if you're not familiar with it, it's a 6 week online program. We've actually just started. So it is a practical, supportive way to put everything we've just gone through into action. It's delivered on Zoom. The session is about 45 minutes once a week, but it's designed to easily fit into your routine. It's meant to be accessible, but it's basically giving you those extra resources and tools beyond this webinar, so you can help incorporate it into your week, help you feel more control and supported. And then, of course, we do have more information on Clara. If you haven't heard of our Clara app, it's basically an AI driven tool designed for people who live with rheumatoid arthritis at this early stage. But it's an easy way to kind of see what programs, services we have. And if you want more information about mindfulness, there's a plethora of information you can access in that app based tool. But just to summarize what we spoke about, there's a lot of things that can amplify arthritis symptoms. And of course, stress, anxiety, depression, poor sleep, all of these can have an impact. So, mind body techniques, there are so many out there, more than what I've just covered today, but they're designed to help you break cycles of negative thinking and designed to improve emotional regulation. So, managing arthritis, I hope we know now that it's not just about the joints, there's also the mental well-being component, but they're designed to actually promote resilience, self-efficacy, and long-term behavior change. So there's a lot of benefits to supporting mental health, and it is becoming more and more recognized as one of those core treatments for osteoarthritis and rheumatoid arthritis. So what I will do is I'm going to pause our recording here, and I will be opening up some for